I feel my paper's going to be a little bit about sticking up for the older generations, being the older speaker here. I will be arguing that there is a role for generational marketing, but I'm going to make some arguments that the differences are maybe hyped, the differences are misunderstood, and perhaps most importantly, corporations and brands are missing big opportunities with the other generations that seem to be neglected. I'm just going to set the scene here by, I guess, giving a pen portrait of what these generations are supposed to be like. I would emphasize that this is a Western viewpoint, and I'll come on to how this maybe fits within Asia. We have our four generations here: baby boomers, Gen X, millennials, Gen Z. In terms of when they're born, baby boomers mid 40s to, well, going up to mid 60s, Gen X mid 60s to 80s, millennials 80s. Where the difference with millennials and Gen Z is not exactly defined. Let's talk about the baby boomers, sometimes referred to as the lucky generation. They were the ones that benefited most from, at least in the West, in housing booms, seeing their properties go up 50-fold, literally, in a lifetime, seeing generous pensions, final salary pensions. It's also a generation that experienced a lot of change, a lot of cultural change. There was the hippie generation, there was the Vietnam War, there was sexual revolution, there was drugs and everything like that. So it's a generation that became more liberal. And then came the Gen X, who are often termed in the West, the latchkey generation, because the parents around that time, more of them were getting divorced. There was more female participation in the workforce. So like me, I would sort of come home to an empty house, walk home from school to an empty house every day. And you're also free to go out, wander around in your neighborhood at the age of 9, 10, and 11, and just cycle around. And this was before the days of childcare. And that kind of forced self-sufficiency maybe had payoffs later on in life when you go out into the big wide world and start your own businesses, for example. And then there's the millennials, who are the most studied generation, and partly because they're growing up with technology, internet, social media. They've been called many things: Gen Y, digital natives, Gen Me, Gen Rent, echo boomers. I don't know if you've heard of all those. And we'll come back to those in a minute. One thing is that they are growing up in a more uncertain world. We've heard all about that in other papers. And there's kind of mixed views on their work ethics. Are they hardworking or are they lazy? We'll come back to that as well. And then there's Gen Z, who's sometimes considered a more extreme version of the millennials in terms of their use of technology, the way they curate information and share it, and it's very much about content and video and visuals rather than messaging. And these are going to be one of the most diverse group ethnically and culturally, far more in mixed marriages, far more having studied overseas, and a generation who could save the world. They're inheriting a world with a hangover of national debt, aging populations, economic degradation. These are the people who could make it a better place, but they've certainly got their work cut out. Now, what it is, at least in the West, is that generations are becoming progressively worse off. As governments spend money to get into power, they're racking up enormous national debts. And we have, certainly in the West, student debts like you've never seen before, youth unemployment, 20%, 30%, even 40% in some Western markets. The situation in Asia is a bit different. Of course, with emerging markets, generations are getting better. Each generation can expect to have better health, more wealth, more life expectancy than previous generations. And I talked about this with my colleagues as to how much this model fits within Asia. There's kind of a view that maybe the millennials in Asia are actually a bit more like the Gen Z, and the Gen X's are a bit like the millennials. So it's almost as if it's sort of shifted one generation. But the millennials, they've been talked about a lot. It has been called the me generation. How many millennials are here actually born after 1980? Please raise your hands. Okay, quite a lot. Now this was one view of millennials. Millennials are unmanageable in corporations because they are impatient, lazy, and entitled as a result of bad parenting, addiction to cell phones, and Facebook depression. Right? Another viewpoint. Actually, the baby boomers, they were the first selfish generation, some of who enjoying very lavish retirements, like my mother. Millennials are growing up in a tougher world. There is no evidence to suggest they are less loyal to their employers or less hardworking. In fact, they are working harder than ever. So which of those is correct? There's one aspect of millennials, which this guy is one of my favorite actors, Michael Douglas, talked about the ninja generation.
You're all pretty much fucked. You don't know it yet, but you're the ninja generation. No income, no job, no assets. You got a lot to look forward to.
So that partly explains the results you saw that YouGov talked about in the UK general election. The youth have no assets. They can't get on the job market. So the Labour Party was saying, well, look, we'll eliminate student debt, right? So what it means is student debt goes from personal debt to national debt, which is fine. It's a great deal because if, like me, I would be quite happy to do that transfer, and then I leave the UK and I come and live in Singapore. It's a great idea. So, moving on, why the obsession with millennials? As I say, I think it's hyped. It's because they grew up in a period of rapid technological change. Their behavior is shaped by technology, and to a degree, their values are changed accordingly. Now, what's happened is corporations and brands see this as some kind of opportunity. I don't know if you know June Airlines. It's a sub-brand from Air France. I believe it's being launched literally now. It's aimed at a young working clientele, the millennials whose lifestyles revolve around digital technology with an innovative and offbeat experience. So this is what the cabin crew uniform is like. It's supposed to be resonate with millennials. It's what millennials are supposed to be like. And this is so specifically targeted at people under 40 years old. Now, the misconceptions and pitfalls of generational marketing. Technology is more strongly associated with millennials because they grew up with technology. But the reality, everybody, is that technology is impacting all generations, often in the same way, and we are all using it in the same way. There's little evidence to suggest that millennials are more comfortable with technology than, say, the Gen X. In the US, baby boomers buy twice as much online than younger generations. Values and behaviors vary enormously within generations. By seeking to stereotype consumers, you can quite easily alienate them. And developing products or services for specific generations, like June Airlines, you can be telling a much bigger market just to go away. Now, here's some stats. Population census. Let's get real on populations. You'll see that Singapore, Malaysia and Thailand, we got the population distribution by those age cohorts for 2016 and projected to 2025. What do you see? We're all getting older. There's no escape. If we look at the millennials, that's based on this definition of 21 to 34, it's just 24% of the market in Singapore. Think of that airline, June Airlines. They have developed a product for a shrinking market. Now, okay, it's true, those millennials who might use that airline, they may grow up, they'll go into the next age cohort, and they might still fly the airline, but what will probably happen is that airline will then start be reaching out to the Gen Z. So why not plan? I think is Singapore Airlines here today? Why not plan? Isn't it better to plan an airline proposition for an aging population? Because you can see where the growth is. It's evident here in all these markets, particularly Singapore and Thailand. Let's look at Singapore. Have you noticed that either research agencies or clients say, we need a sample of 18 to 54-year-olds, right? Now, how many requests do you have for serving over 55-year-olds? So less than 10% of requests for surveys are among over 55-year-olds. Now, okay, it might be because you don't find them in online panels, but ask yourselves, how many of your surveys are covering over 55-year-olds? So you're missing a third of the market, and then you're going to be missing even more of the market. Isn't it better that that is your market? So it can be a case that you haven't got the budget to spend a few $1,000s more to sample offline, but you could be missing millions in market opportunities. So by 2020, now, okay, it's true, those in the online panels, the Gen Xers may stay on your online panels when they go into their late 50s and 60s. But I think what we're seeing at the moment is missed opportunity. Now, I'm going to look at some case studies from BDRC Group. A couple of categories we worked in: video gaming and the travel sector, to look to see if there really is evidence of difference by generations. And one of them was quite interesting, was about the video gaming market. So we did this study with Bandai Namco, so it's a leading game developer. This was a survey, I think it was 6-7 countries across Asia Pacific. We included Gen Z, Millennials, Gen X. We got some baby boomers as well. But I'm also going to refer to a study in the US where the survey was done on video gaming. Among teens, 97% of teens partake in video gaming. That dropped to about 20% of all adults aged 20 to 64. But participation in video gaming actually increased among the 65-year-olds. The 36% of 65-plus-year-olds are involved in video gaming in the US. And why is that? Because they got more time. Now, within Asia, you can see that all these generations partake, and this is based on those who do game, I think at least once a month. You'll see that the frequency of buying games, it does peak with millennials, 72% buying games at least every 6 months, but there's you'll see that there's not a big difference between Gen Z and the baby boomers. And in fact, the way they buy games is not that much different between the generations. Millennials somewhat more likely to buy through traditional retail, but they're all downloading. The only generation that's a bit different are the Gen Z, 18% who are more likely to buy pirated games than the other generations. And then in terms of among gamers, how much time do they spend on gaming? This is hours per week. you'll see there's not much difference between Gen Z and Millennial. It drops with Gen X, but recovers again with baby boomers. So it increases again with baby boomers, reflecting I guess time availability with these generations. And the other thing is the gaming genres that generations play. Here there are differences. You'll see that the taste in games. So these are the top 3 gaming genres that these generations play. Shooters and role-playing important to Gen Z and Millennials. Simulation games specific to Gen Z. You'll see that puzzles and sports are more for the older adults, but strangely, shooters comes back in fashion again with the baby boomers, so that they're actually having a similar taste in video games as Gen Z. But let's move on to a sector that we're doing a lot of work in, which is the travel sector. This is based on the BDRC Group Media Global, or GPS Global Passenger Survey. This involved a survey of almost 4,000 international air travelers in Asia. Note, this includes Millennials, Gen X, and baby boomers. So note, we can do baby boomers online. It's just, they don't appear in online panels, but people think, well, baby boomers don't do online research. Yes, they do. They know how to use the internet. And sure enough, we covered them. So you can see that based on this, Gen X and baby boomers show so this question was for your trip you're about to go on. This survey actually surveys people at the point of booking. For your trip, what is the main reason for your travel? And for Gen X and baby boomers, it's quite similar. Family connection, that is going to see family. Visiting relatives is the main motive for that trip, about 30%. Millennials, though, is less. So this is millennials in Asia. You'll see that the family motive is significantly less than it is for the older generations. But what we see is, because this was a global study, we were able to compare millennials in Asia with their millennial counterparts in other parts of the world. So examples here: USA, UK, Australia, compared to Southeast Asia, China, and Japan. So Asians, their main motive for the leisure trip is more about relaxation with a bit of sightseeing and shopping. But perhaps unusually, family connection was, as the motive for travel, was higher in the West, particularly in Australia. And it might be because, in Asia, when people travel, they actually want to get away from their families. Yeah. In the West, maybe they'll go and visit family so they can go and stay with them for free. Australia in particular, 43% family connection was highest. But lowest for Australia, you might find that surprising, as landscape and exploration, because they've got it themselves. When they go traveling, they'd rather do something different. Now, another thing is talking about hotels. Karen, you talked about hotels, so I'm going to talk about hotels too. This is from the BDRC Hotel Guest Survey, which covered both business and leisure travellers. We looked at the top 3 priorities for selecting a hotel for leisure in different parts of Asia. And this is Southeast Asia. It's actually Singapore, Malaysia, and Thailand. And we looked at the top reason for selecting a hotel. 1, 2, 3. You'll see that millennials and baby boomers actually show similar needs compared to, it was millennials and baby boomers are more similar than Gen X. Gen X had completely different priorities in Southeast Asia. Free Wi-Fi, for example, important to millennials in Southeast Asia, is number 2 for baby boomers in Southeast Asia as well. China, it's very variable across the generations, no real pattern. Japan, Location as a recurring importance, location of the hotel, value and trustworthiness relevant to most groups. And then Australia, remarkably consistent across the generations. Now, you see, based on this, it's quite hard for a hotel chain to have a generational marketing campaign. Yeah? But that's why my argument is don't talk about generations, talk about context and need. What is the purpose of the trip and how long are you going to stay at the hotel? So if we take, for example, some of the brands in the market, the hotel brands, they tailor the brands according to the length of stay. So Marriott Hotels and Resorts is a regular, it's like 1 to 4 nights, a traditional hotel room with a range of public spaces and services. You've got Marriott Residence for longer stays, 5 to 29 nights. Marriott Executive Apartments for 30 plus nights, and executive stay. So this is spanning all generations. It's reaching to all generations. Unlike the June Airlines, which is saying, well, no, we're after this generation, this 20, 30% of the market. No, this is covering the entire market, or by budget. So going from Fairfield Inn by Marriott to the Ritz-Carlton, all in the Marriott Hotel Group. So generations doesn't, well, it can apply here if older people are wealthier. Another thing is the homestay market. This is for Southeast Asia. How many, within those age cohorts, how many have heard of the homestay market, like Airbnb, but there's plenty of others. So awareness is actually pretty high across all the generations. Now you might say, okay, well, there's a big difference here. Millennials, 50% of millennials have used a homestay, which is twice the baby boomers. But you have to ask yourself this question. Do you think that millennials who use the homestay market are using it for different reasons than the baby boomers? No. It's essentially what we call jobs to be done. That is, I need a room, cheap, well located. That need is common between millennials, Gen X, and baby boomers. Likewise, grab taxi. There's probably more use of grab taxi with the younger generations, but it's still serving the same need that I need a taxi. Now it's hard to get a taxi, so get me a taxi. So it's the generations are using it in the same way. And my final example is context or circumstantial segmentation. We're doing quite a bit of work in the online booking space. So this is Agoda. I'm sure many of you use it. If I'm a visitor to Agoda can very quickly understand the type of hotel, or guess at least the type of hotel that I would need. Because we just have to look at what the visitor is looking for. They're looking, based on these dates, they're looking for a weekend stay. It's a couple. It's Singapore. So it's likely to be a couple for a city break for the weekend. Now you can add enhanced filters like, well, the purpose of trip. If it's a weekend, I guess you could guess it's a leisure trip. If it's during the week, you still ask, well, is this a business or leisure trip? What type of hotel do you want? Boutique hotel, chain hotel? What kind of experience do you want? Authenticity, modern or traditional? So by capturing that, and you've got to bear in mind that most people don't go beyond the first 1 or 2 pages of a search. If you want to convert that sale, because you get a lot of visitors, but not that, then the bookings is just a subset of that. If you get that, then the short list of hotels can tailor it to what the needs are of that visitor. But would you add this? Would you add this as a filter? What generation are you? No, you don't need to. So, summing up, generational marketing. Okay, it has its obvious applications. Anti-aging cream, retirement planning. It does have its applications. But marketeers are confused by technology. Millennials receive more attention because technology had a bigger impact on them when they grew up. But technology is used by consumers in the same way. Differences by generations are less than people think. So there are missed opportunities with the baby boomers who can be wealthier, they're a bigger group, they're growing, and they're spending more, including more online. Let's talk about, if you're going to talk about generations, let's actually talk about life stage. Singles, pre-family, families. Needs are far more predictable when you understand the context of the consumer. So, somebody who's single in their 40s is going to have similar needs to somebody who's single in their 20s. But we work in the area of quick service restaurants, financial services. Life stage marketing is going to be far more relevant in terms of determining the product proposition that you put to that consumer. Context or circumstantial marketing is far more powerful. So the Agoda example I gave you, that is about driving sales, higher conversion rate sales. If you understand the context, you don't need to understand the age of the customer. And more importantly, attempting to reach out to consumers just because of their age is, and with obvious stereotyping, as in the case of June, can have a negative impact in two ways. One, it's telling a much bigger market just to go away. But if I'm a millennial and I fly June, I think, this is who I'm supposed to be? Is this the way I'm supposed to dress? No, if that doesn't resonate with me, I'm just not going to come back. So, thank you.
Question for Piers. I think I agreed with almost everything you said. So the importance of context and the fact that brands kind of getting their hands around these kind of sometimes meaningless generalizations of groups, so millennials, Gen Y, Gen Z, and wrapping entire campaigns around trying to make their campaigns talk to people by the way they dress and things like that. I guess two comments. Actually, interestingly enough, the slide that you showed, like the attributes on what people look for when they book hotels, to me actually showed a lot of variance in the kind of needs across markets. And one of my points after the MRP slide was be careful about overgeneralizing across geos. And to me, that actually is kind of a good case of where like really hyper-targeted kind of content could be of value. But I kind of, my broader comment was the June example is really good, and I actually think, I guess my question to you is there a difference between, we know that there's examples of good marketing and bad marketing, and I think building an entire business, especially in the airline space, on top of targeting millennials is a bad idea. But if we take that back to just another example of just misunderstanding what millennials are, and people sitting, like the Pepsi commercial recently is a really good example of a group of marketers just thinking they know enough about this group and just putting something out that's just tone deaf. So I guess the question is, do you think that the June example and the Pepsi example as extremes, is there leeway or is there middle ground where more targeted marketing based on age, I won't say millennials, but based on age, could potentially have value or increased ROI?
Virgin Airlines from Richard Branson. So there was a certain style and design to that product proposition, but I don't think it was overtly saying this is for younger people. So it was designed to resonate with that age group, but it didn't send out a message that saying that older age groups, it wasn't relevant to them. So I think that was a far more effective approach rather than trying to say, yeah, this is for this age group.